Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Well, thanks everyone. So, the question for today is, what has Tolstoy got against my favorite composer? And I want to start out with a little story about Beethoven's Kreutzer Sonata. And it's going to double as a little exercise in Tolstoyan practice before we get to Tolstoy's story. And I want to start with an unanswerable Tolstoyan question, which is, who are the forgotten heroes of your field of study? And you're going to meet one from my field today, which sure has a lot of forgotten heroes. Now, I'm curious, how many people here today are classical music fans, self-described, Western classical music? Oh, that makes me so happy. I'm so glad to hear that. And has anybody listened to the Kreutzer Sonata before this class, before today? All right, a few. Anybody played this thing? Okay, that would be scary. And has anybody here heard of George Bridgetower? Wow, okay. So, there could have been a world where this piece was called the Bridgetower Sonata. And why is that? Well, it was premiered by a half-black, half-Polish violinist named George Bridgetower. Here he is, that's Bridgetower. And this guy premiered this thing with Beethoven at the piano in 1803. And supposedly, he was the only person who could actually play this piece. And he and Beethoven had this lively, short-lived friendship with lots of carousing and lots of drinking. And then something happened. Something went off the rocks. And supposedly it was because Bridgetower had insulted a woman whom Beethoven knew. Is that really what happened? We don't know what happened. We'll probably never know. But literature is the great speculator, the great reflector, and perhaps the reason why Tolstoy couldn't seem to give it up. And the poet Rita Dove has written an entire book of poems about the George Bridgetower incident. I'm just going to read you a few lines from the prologue. This is a story about music, and what it does to those who are slaves. Yes, slavery of all kinds enters into the mix, although the skin of our protagonist does not play so great a role in his subsequent advancement and fade from grace as might be imagined. Or does it? Rather, let us say that the racial divide has not yet been invented. You live, you die, things happened in between the two. Thanks, Victoria. Now, there's a lot of familiar Tolstoyan themes in these lines. We've got the problems of memory and the problems of narrative, and we've got the enslaving dangers of music, which are our theme today. So, for some reason, as Morrison would say, the title of the sonata is changed. And on your handouts that I've given you, you've got the original, Beethoven's words in Italian. And he writes, Sonata Mulatica, that's the title of Dove's collection, by the way. Mulatto Sonata, composed for the Mulatto Bridgetower, great fool mulatto composer. All right, and then the dedication is changed, and here is what it looks like in its new form. To R. Kreutzer, friend of the composer. Well, it's a different kind of epithet, isn't it? Rodolphe Kreutzer was a renowned French violinist who supposedly had a very innovative bowing technique, and Beethoven wanted him to give a certain prestige and glamour to this sonata. But in fact, he never played it, and I can hardly even say how funny this is, but according to Berlioz, Kreutzer called this sonata outrageously unintelligible and didn't play it. Now, I should mention at this point that Bridgetower sight-read this thing at the premiere. He had no time for rehearsal. He and Beethoven just played this thing on the fly. So it's clearly not entirely unintelligible to one who can understand. There's also some more Tolstoyan reasons why the words of Kreutzer about the sonata are so very funny, and we'll get back to those in a little bit. So there's two reasons why I wanted to start today with the story of an elided hero and with these lines from Rita Dove. One is that, well, I love Western classical music about as much as I love anything, just about. But like I said, this field really has a serious memory problem. We've got forgotten heroes, both living and dead. And it's on me. Now, the Tolstoy of War and Peace would say that we're never going to be free of problems of memory and narrative. And this is one of his criticisms of the historians. But that same Tolstoy also felt that we have to do what's in our power to give credit where it's due, and to tell the truth and to speak with courage. And in War and Peace, we see him do this over and over himself, say with General Kutuzov, trying to set the record straight in the best way he can. I also wanted to start out with heroes because on the reading I'm going to give you today, heroism and its perversions are at the heart of Tolstoy's Kreutzer Sonata. And this is a theme that's been with us since the very beginning of the class, since day one. So think back to Sebastopol, think back to the Raid, think back to Prisoner of the Caucasus, and of course all the way through War and Peace. We're going to get there, but first we've got to talk about music. Now there's a lot of literature on Tolstoy and Beethoven and the Kreutzer Sonata and music. And a lot of it focuses on the structural similarities between Tolstoy's Kreutzer Sonata and Beethoven's, the one perhaps being modeled on the other. And on your handout, you have a quote from Professor Emerson summarizing a view like this. And it's very interesting stuff, but it's not really what we're going to talk about today. Instead, I want to focus on what Tolstoy found distressing about Beethoven and about music, and about this sonata in particular. Now, Tolstoy loved music, but not all music, and not this music. So what did he like when he did like music and the arts? Ruth Rishton says that over the years, on and off, his favorite composers were Bach, Mozart, Schubert, Chopin, and interestingly, Weber as well. And what did he want art and music to do? You have a quote from What is Art on the handout, which I'm just going to paraphrase. Tolstoy wanted art to do one of two things. Either it should be inspiring with virtue, so it should be spiritual and open to his Christian faith and aligned with it. Or short of that, he wanted art to have this social function where it brings people together and induces this feeling of universal harmony and brotherhood. And for Tolstoy, that meant that there had to be a simplicity about it. It could not require education, because otherwise it was going to be really divisive and elitist and exclusive. So not surprisingly, he really likes peasant music, he really likes singing, he likes simple tunes. Now let's go back for a minute to this idea of art that can inspire virtue. What's that about? How would that work? Some of you will actually recognize that it's a very old idea. It goes back to Plato, to Confucius, to Aristotle, and if you accept this lineage, through Rousseau, his hero, to Tolstoy. And what the ancients thought gave art its ethical power is that it was mimetic. They thought that art imitated life, and in that way could induce a change. So here, this is Aristotle, Politics, Book 8. Rhythm and melody supply imitations of anger and gentleness, and also of courage and temperance, and of all the qualities contrary to these. And in listening to such strains, our souls undergo a change. So putting this crudely, you hear something, it resembles an impression or a feeling that you can maybe recognize, and that induces an inward change in you, it changes your soul. And that's a double-edged sword, of course, because that meant that the arts could inspire the opposite of virtue just as well. And this is one reason Plato wanted to ban poets from his theoretical republic, for example. Now, Tolstoy really was concerned that the arts could affect you through exposure, that they could change you. And all these thinkers gave music credit for having special powers, even over all of the other art forms. So think of the disaster of Natasha Rostova at the opera in War and Peace, for example. Now here's Plato, this is Republic, Book 3. Musical training is a more potent instrument than any other because rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul on which they mightily fasten. I don't really know what that means, and we probably wouldn't say a thing like that today, but I get it. Music is extremely powerful, weirdly and shockingly powerful, for just a sequence of pitches, and we have to remember that power as we move forward into Tolstoy's Kreutzer Sonata. So that's what could go well for for Tolstoy in music and in art. Now, what was he worried about when it went badly? And we're going to answer this question through the example of Beethoven. I want to argue for you today that there's not one but two Beethoven villains for Tolstoy, two different Beethovens who pose him a problem. One Beethoven of What is Art, and one Beethoven of the Kreutzer Sonata. So what's wrong with the Beethoven of What is Art? Well, he's incomprehensible. This is late Beethoven. He's difficult. He's deaf by this point. Tolstoy cuts no slack whatsoever on this account. And he's writing quite challenging music, truly. And so what's the problem with that? Well, that means it's divisive. It can't be unifying. It can't have that social, fraternal function that Tolstoy wanted art to have. And on the handout, I've given you a quote where he is just laying into Beethoven's Ninth Symphony with polemical delight. He says, "What, the Ninth Symphony is not a good work?" And this is a really interesting test case, because as some of you know, the poem around which the Ode to Joy chorus is centered is all about brotherly love, and all about universal harmony. But it's not enough for Tolstoy, because he feels that Beethoven screwed it all up by setting that poem in such a complicated fashion musically that it undermined the very meaning of brotherly love for him. I'm just going to play you a really short clip from that chorus, which probably Tolstoy did not like very much. And you can hear this chorus singing the words, "Seid umschlungen, Millionen," which means, "be embraced, O millions." And you're going to hear that famous, simple, lovely Ode to Joy theme in its elegance, but you also hear another theme from the movement going on at exactly the same time. So you can tell me if you think this is music that for Tolstoy could embrace the millions. Yeah, so way too complicated for Tolstoy. Too contrapuntal, too alienating, no way. Far cry from the singing of the old peasant women. Now, just as a side note, Tolstoy did not like the concert hall very much in general. He found it constricting, he found it unnatural, expensive, exclusionary. He really preferred music in a domestic kind of setting. That's what he was used to. And he also preferred music that had a clear social occasion. So a funeral, or a wedding, or ironically even a military march. Now, coming back to the two Beethoven villains I mentioned, so we've been through the problem with the Beethoven of what is art. He's incomprehensible, he's divisive, it's what you just heard. Now I want to argue that that's not the problem with the Kreutzer Sonata, that it's not a problem of intelligibility, and that, by the way, is why I find it so funny that Rudolf Kreutzer called this sonata outrageously unintelligible. I don't even think that's the problem in this story. I think the problem in the story is much closer to that mimetic, ethical function and ability of art that we talked about earlier. Here's Poznishev talking about music. He says, "It's a terrible thing, that sonata, and especially that part," he means the beginning. "In general, music is a dreadful thing. What is it? I don't understand it. What does it do? It has neither an exalting nor a debasing function, but it produces agitation. Music makes me forget myself, my real position. It transports me to some other position." So music agitates, and it transports you out of your state into a different one, where your perceptions and your incentives and your motivations and desires might all be different. And that's dangerous because it can lead you to bad actions. It can make bad decisions for you. Now, Tolstoy's Kreutzer Sonata is full of bad decisions and bad actions, but which of them are caused by music? Which are caused by the sonata? Or another way of asking that, what is the real plot function of the Kreutzer Sonata in this story? Does it cause adultery? Does it cause murder? Both of these are suggested, these are both important ideas, and we have to bear them in mind. But I really would not like to press either of those claims in its strong form. I do eventually want to propose something Professor Emerson has suggested in an article called What is Art and the Anxiety of Music? We'll get there in just a moment. First, I want to look at the beginning of Beethoven's Kreutzer Sonata. So this piece starts with a slow introduction, and that was a fairly typical classical gesture. Haydn used these, Mozart, of course Beethoven. And if these guys were writing a multi-movement work, especially starting with an upbeat allegro movement, they would offset that by starting with a slow, stately introduction in a different tone, often in a minor mood, and it gave the whole thing a certain framing and gravity and ceremony. And usually that introduction was in a minor key leading to a much more upbeat major one. going. But here we have the opposite. Here we start out in this spacious, beautiful, light and airy A major, where we get to hang out just for a few bars. And then the harmony starts to darken, and we make our way toward this tempestuous and dramatic A minor presto. And you'll hear the very beginning of this in just a moment. But the other, even more important thing about this introduction for our purpose today is that it's a dialogue. So the violin makes a statement, the piano returns it. And the violin says something else, and the piano responds. And they keep going until they're playing together, or they are amending each other, and they are punctuating each other. What is not happening is that the piano is simply accompanying the violin. That's not what this is. And this has real importance for our story, which we'll get into. So here's just the very beginning. I wish we could play the whole introduction. So now this takes us to the real problem with the Kreutzer Sonata for Pozdnishev, which is that it shows him a side of his wife that he's never seen before. Here's a quote. "I had never seen my wife as she was that evening. Those shining eyes, that severe, significant expression while she played, her melting languor, her feeble, pathetic, and blissful smile after they had finished." And of course, as elsewhere in Tolstoy, it's all in the face. But this is what gets to Pozdnishev. His wife is in a real interchange with someone, a real exchange for the first time, and it's not him, and it couldn't have been him. Because what Tolstoy has us understand is that their marriage throughout was always about mutual sexual exploitation, and it was never about compassion or the kind of common moral values that he wanted, say, for his son Ilya in the letter that he read in a marriage. So here's Pozdnishev's wife, and this violinist Trukhachevsky has shown up, and suddenly, a wife who doesn't even have a name in this story. How telling is that? She has no name. Suddenly she has a self because of this music, because of this introduction, this dialogue. Now we're going to jump right into the heart of the presto movement. These performers, by the way, this is Gideon Kramer and Martha Argerich, and they are quite a force. This is the famous third theme of the presto. Wow, right? It's just this riveting thing. It's got this driving, relentless intensity to it, this hammering rhythm. And you can hear in this these marching pairs of two notes, and that's a motif through quite a lot, but not all of the sonata. And here they're just in this furious iambic rhythm going da, da. And it's quite rousing stuff, and it sits right on this line between aggression and total joy. And to me, that's a big part of what the problem is. And Pozdnishev even gives us a handy phrase for it. This is the moment when he's returned early from his business trip and surprised his wife with Trukhachevsky. He says, "I felt that need of destruction, violence, and transport of rage, and yielded to it." So transport of rage. Now, rage is already a problem for Tolstoy. He doesn't like the angry emotions. But think about that word transport. It's quite similar to what Posnyshev was already saying about music. It is literally an ecstatic displacement from your own center of your own being. And in common usage, we often talk about transports of joy. So even this is already positioned between joy and rage. Music, as we've seen, it can agitate you, can irritate you, for better or for worse. And in its own form, this really is the old the old Platonic worry about mimetic art. It's about what it can do to you and make you feel and make you want. And we've seen this worry in Tolstoy before. We've seen it in a Beethovenian guise before, with this confluence of extreme excitement and aggression and joy. I'm thinking in War and Peace of the night before Petya Rostov is killed in battle. He's having this dream. It's a musical dream. He's dreaming a score, and it's clearly a Beethoven score. Ruth Rishton talks about which one, if you're curious. And here's a quote from Ruth Rishton about that. She says, "The symphony score supplies the content for a grandiose dream of glory, a state of desire." Now, think about that dream of glory and that state of desire as we go along, because that state of desire is very important to the next point that I want to make about Beethoven's heroic style. So what's the heroic style of Beethoven? This is the hallmark of his middle period, as opposed to the late period that we were just talking about with the Ninth Symphony and the Noise Art. And of course, these periods are a real simplification, but they're helpful here. So the heroic style is this grand, rousing, surging, very romantic, often martial kind of business, and it has strong political overtones, revolutionary ones. This comes out of France, strong French influence in this music. And the quintessential heroic work of Beethoven is the Third Symphony, which is the Eroica Symphony. That just means heroic symphony, completed in 1804, a year after the Kreutzer, so fairly contemporary. Now, having been through War and Peace, you'll appreciate this. The Third Symphony of Beethoven was going to be the Bonaparte Symphony, because Beethoven, like the young Pierre, admired Napoleon and thought that he was very grand and would bring good things to Europe. But Napoleon declared himself emperor and crossed the line with Beethoven's book, and Beethoven famously ripped up his dedication page. This is our second dedication change of the story, by the way. And I'm talking about this because it shows us the historical and political stakes of the heroic style. It didn't come out of nowhere. It's very 19th century Europe, and it meant something to people. It wasn't random. Scott Burnham in our music department here has a whole book called Beethoven Hero, and it's about programmatic readings of this symphony and the heroic style of Beethoven. And the reason for being of Scott's book, if I may, is that over time, listeners have treated with an incredible seriousness the connection between Beethoven's heroic style and actual human struggle, actual human life. So Scott writes, "Our allegiance to the heroic style is distinctly ethical, bound inextricably with the values of self that flourished in the early 19th century and are still maintained, albeit covertly, in much of our current musical discourse. Distinctly ethical." So the ethical meaning of this style is not so much about musical mimesis, as we saw in What is Art. It's more about the way that people identify their own lives and struggles, and those throughout history, those of humanity in general, with the narrative of the heroic style, which is all about struggle and transcendence and overcoming. And Scott gives a Latin motto to this ethos, ad astra per aspera, to the stars through adversity. And this is not Tolstoy's kind of struggle. He's interested in struggle, but that of Pierre, Father Sergius, for purity and wholeness. Not this kind of thing. This is much closer to that swashbuckling, Byronic heroism that was such a problem, so roundly criticized in The Raid, and also parts of War and Peace. So think back to The Raid. We're talking about Tolstoyan courage, and we're talking about what it is, and we're talking about what it's not, which is easier to say. Here's what courage is not. It is not the daredevil braves who shape their lives on the model of Lermontov's and Marlinsky's heroes. These officers see the Caucasus only through the prism of such books as A Hero of Our Time and Moulin Noor, and are guided in their actions, not by their own inclinations, but by the examples of their models. By the examples of their models. So that state of desire that leads to, that dream of glory, leads to violence again and again in Tolstoy, in the death of Petya, the death of Aladdin in her maid. In War and Peace, Nikolai Rostov almost kills a French soldier cold-bloodedly under this spirit, but the spirit abandons him and he takes pity. Now, Rishkin explicitly links the heroic style of Beethoven with the death of Petya. She writes, putting the grand 19th century musical concept of Napoleon and the Eroica into a metaphor, expressing a child's dream of glory, calls attention to a theme. War is not, as the historians say it is, but the fantasy of each soldier, or a dream in the mind of a child, and that'll be familiar to us. Now, the Kreutzer Sonata is not the Eroica Symphony, so why am I talking about this? What I'm saying is that the Kreutzer Sonata is something like a pared-down, drawing-room-appropriate indoor version of this kind of style. The musicologist Angus Watson calls that third presto theme that we just heard one of Beethoven's most inspiring heroic melodies. And Tolstoy might ask, inspiring of what? So what I've been saying is that we've got one Beethoven villain in what is art, the incomprehensible, elitist, divisive, late Beethoven. And in contrast, we've got the Beethoven hero of the middle period, who's the big bad guy in the Kreutzer Sonata. And this guy is agitating and rousing and seductive and inspiring for good or for bad. And a more specific way to say that is vanity. Vanity. So this bad romantic heroism that gets people killed and makes killers of them is driven by vanity, and so are a lot of the other major Tolstoyan foibles. We can see vanity at work in the Kreutzer Sonata. There's this, one of the most incredible moments in the story. Truchachevsky has retreated under the piano, a little comically in fear, crawled under the piano, and he wants to escape out the door of the room. And Posnichev hits his wife in the face and tells the narrator on the train, I wanted to run after him, but remembered that it's ridiculous to run after one's wife's lover in one's socks. And I did not wish to be ridiculous, but terrible. In spite of the fearful frenzy I was in, I was aware all the time of the impression I might produce on others, and was even partly guided by that impression. To me, the socks really make this passage, because they're what draw attention to this absurd self-consciousness that he has. And remember, these are the same socks he was wearing so he could sneak up on them and surprise them behind the door. So even in this heated moment, this fever pitch, he is watching himself and he's watching others watch him. And he's guided by the example of his models, right? Not by himself. And the truth is that we've seen this aspect of Posnichev this entire time, this acute, anxious self-consciousness. And this is the reason why Posnichev himself, not his wife, invites Truchachevsky back to the house for dinner after he already suspects this guy and can't stand him. He says, I remember that instant, because at that moment, I might not have invited him and then nothing would have happened. Doubtful, but okay. I glanced at him and at her and said silently to myself, don't suppose that I'm jealous. Don't suppose that I'm afraid of you. You have a few more quotes like this on the handout. We can see this vanity at every step in the escalating violence in Tolstoy's Kreutzer Sonata. Here's a scary moment. This is from right before the murder. I jumped up and went towards her, but just as I jumped up, I remembered becoming conscious of my rage and asking myself, is it right to give way to this feeling? At once I answered that it was right. It would frighten her. And instead of restraining my fury, I began inflaming it still further, and was glad it burnt yet more fiercely within me. So early on, Posnichev's self-consciousness is a check on his bad behavior, but more and more often we see it justifying his bad behavior to himself, or even intensifying it when he says he wants to seem terrifying, he wants to show the outward pitch of his anger. And it's at this moment, a little bit comically, that Posnichev says as an aside to the narrator on the train, I suppose it's hardly necessary to say I'm very vain. If one is not vain, there's nothing to live for in our usual way of life. So vanity, this old demon of Tolstoy's, on the reading I'm giving you, is what gets Posnashev into the massive aristocratic vices that Tolstoy hates. And it's vanity that gets him into this loveless marriage, and it's vanity that ends him up in this fatal, murderous jealousy. And I've been arguing that this vanity is linked in this story to the heroic aesthetics of Beethoven in the middle period in particular. And that this same heroism, this whole time, has stood as a scourge, as the opposite of courage and virtue for Tolstoy. And we've seen this vanity make people kill and die for nothing. First we saw that in war, and now we're seeing this here in love and sex. I think it would be too much to say that music causes the violence in Tolstoy's Kreutzer Sonata story, but I do think it can give us some insight into the psychological stations of its escalation. Thanks.